this is what will come back. And I just put a bunch of questions on here for you newer people especially, okay? So if you go to page 5, it's the actual budget from 24, okay? This is just a summary page. I'm not going to spend time on that. Next page is what's called motor vehicle, page 6. That's just a calculation. Page 7 are the transfers that you made. So one thing to think about when you're making transfers, utility funds, there's a statute, 12-825D, that says if you have, and this sounds horrible to everybody's citizens, if you have a surplus in that fund, I don't know why they use surplus, but because that would mean, okay, you've got too much money, but that's not the case. If you've got extra money sitting there, you can transfer to any fund of the city from a utility fund, okay? So what some cities do, they don't want to pay as much tax, and it's usually in an electric fund city. You know, water and sewer are not money makers. They are typically, you just cover literally what in all cities, you know. And water is not just a problem in Gallup, it's a problem all over the state of Kansas. Pratt's purification plant that they're looking at is $60 million just to get the nitrates out of their water. And they've got wells going down like crazy. I think Galveston right now we're at 2 of 7 wells working, I think is what it is. And the water storage is another problem. So there's just a lot of things there. So water and sewer don't generate enough surplus to transfer to other funds, but electric does. So when you look, hold your finger right there, when you look at page, page 19. So this is the publication in the paper. So I wanted to show you how 1 mil works so you can be thinking about that when you're looking at whether it's debt or looking at these other options. So I've got written there 4,597. You see that number? And the way you get to that is you move the assessed value 3 decimal points to the left. So 4,596,952, you would move it 3 decimal points to the left, and that's 1 mil. Okay? So like in your case, that just roughly what I said about 4% on $1 million, that's 40,000. You literally almost would have 10 mils generated by interest income instead of by having to do it with taxes. You see what I'm saying? And I look at that in any expenditure or anything, sales tax, franchise fees, whatever you have in generating, you look and say, I can save 2 mils here by doing this, okay? And that's I feel like a good way, because then, now franchise taxes, you know, they're going to still get taxed because that excise tax goes on the utility or the cell tower or whatever. It'll come back, but it just is in a different way. And like I was telling Pratt the other day, if you can shift it to the state of Kansas, they're paying for your expenditure, and you're still paying for it, but the percentage is what? Literally nothing, because you're spreading it across the entire state of Kansas. Okay? So that's what you look at. You look at different ways that you can take an expenditure. I think right now we're sitting at almost $3 million we received from the state in Galva. And I just found out Friday that the EPA now is going to, maybe not for us, but statewide, they may give some more. So there's always money. You just have to kind of stay with it and see what your project is and see if there's a funding source for that. Okay? So 1 mil is 4,597. If you go to page 8, shows the debt, and it shows what was going to be paid in 23 and 24, and we kind of looked at that on the audit report. You have no lease purchases unless you've done it in the last 7, 8 months, okay? If you go to page 10, this is the general fund. I'll just show you a couple things here. Again, this whole thing with 4,597 is 1 mil. You see sales tax, 112 up there written on the right-hand side. 112,000 was the sales tax we talked about. So that's 24, almost 25 mils it saves in tax. Now that's sales tax, so you're paying it, but maybe it's people outside that are paying it, you know, instead of you, the citizens. Or maybe it's coming from other sources. The next one down there is the 1% sales tax. It's 17 mils. So if you didn't have that coming into your special highway fund by transfer, that would add another 17 mils to your tax, your mill levy, okay? So that sales tax seems like it's a spread across everyone. And there's a debate on that, you know, who should pay sales tax. I mean, some people maybe that can't afford sales tax are paying it to help fund that 1%. So there's a lot there. Page 11, you always talk about budget authority. I'm just showing some highlights before I come back when I'm talking the budget. If you look on page 11, the total budget authority for the general fund is $966,076 last year, okay? And the way it works in the state of Kansas, it's not by line item, it's not by department in the general fund, it's by total. So like in the general fund, you have general government, police, streets, park, you know. If one of those departments overspends the budget you set, it's not a budget violation by the state of Kansas. Now, the department shouldn't go over the budget, and sometimes there is reason to go over that department's budget, but that's the rule to remember. It's the total fund, okay? I just wrote some things. Page 12, I was wrong on that. I was just writing that you had 30,000 in street expenditures, but that's just ones that you have built in the general fund. I found it later over here on page 13 where you have the transfer to special highway. I've noted it there at $80,000. So the 30 is on top of the 80 that you're transferring to special highway. So if you look at this budget, that was a question I got. How much are we spending on streets? Was a phone call, okay? So that would be 80 plus 30 plus the motor fuel tax that can only be spent on streets, which was what was another 12,000 or 18,000 here in the budget, okay? So that would be 128,000 in your budget roughly that you have budgeted for streets, okay? The swimming pool, I don't know what, I know it's been open closed, I don't know, is it still going to be open this summer? Okay, so on page 13, that was a question I had, because pools are awesome, but literally across the state of Kansas, it is unbelievable the cost to run a pool. And if the older the pool, the more it takes because of all the equipment. But like I said, pools are important. And it's unbelievable how many people it takes to run. Like, how many, I'm just going to ask you this, because this blew me away. When the person put their water park in, how many employees do you think that takes? 83. Isn't that unbelievable? I mean, that just blew me away when they told 83? That's crazy. Okay, 14, a question I had there. Well, the top part is where I say debt payments. The way it works typically in a city is you have a bond and interest fund or a debt service fund, and that's what you have at the top of page 14. But you could also pay the debt out of the utility fund. So every city is different. So you either could pay it in the bond and interest fund and transfer from the utility, or you can pay it directly out of the utility and only pay over here in the debt service what is not utility. And that's the way you are, okay? So the street bonds are paid out of debt service. The water revolving fund that's still being paid off by 26 is paid out of your water fund, okay? But every city is different how it doesn't matter, it's just how they've done it, okay? The library, is it, I mean, that's a dumb question maybe, but is it not funded out of the city? No? Really?
Township.
Well, the township pays the whole thing?
That's township.
Really? I guess I forgot that. Okay. Anyway, that's why I put nothing to the library. I'll give you an example. You see all kinds of levels. Whitewater. I just started doing theirs. They hadn't been audited for 7 years. Okay? Should have been audited for 7 years, but they haven't been audited for 7 years. So we were dealing with it. The library there gets from the city $70,000. That's the largest I've seen across the state of Kansas, okay? So it just kind of depends, you know, who funds it, whether it's township or city. And those are questions I get all the time. Who funds this, you know? Who pays for this? The next one I'm going to talk about is special highway on page 15. And that's pretty well just street improvements. Right now, well, this has been 22. You have 161,000. I think it was 203,000 I saw in the audit report there on that front page. 206,000, yeah, at the end of 23. The bottom there, special equipment, that one has 102,000. And that just doesn't go very far with the backhoe these days, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, all the equipment's just pretty crazy. The next page is Parks and Rec. That is the alcoholic beverage tax that you get from the county, and it can only be spent for Parks and Rec. So, and that has kind of a broad, you know, it could be ball fields, it could be equipment on your, like, swings, you know, different types of things on that. Okay, here's the question I have on your utility funds, really. I always ask this, and then I'll tell you a quick story, and then I think I'm done. Water, sewer, and trash. When was the last time you had a rate increase? Do you remember? Or do you have one that automatically increases every year? Do you have an automatic ordinance? Okay, so here's what happened at Pratt. This was right before I got there. The electric fund was bankrupt at Pratt. They had to do a 21% increase in 1 year, and the consultant said 40%, okay? And what happens in these governments, it's really interesting, is I'm not sure why they just let it go like that, because Pratt is a pretty progressive city. I'm not sure why they did that. They've done the same thing right now we're working on this year with the water. Their water, you can look at your water rates, and I haven't looked at this for a while, but where Galvin and Canton are, but you have the rates across the state of Kansas. Pratt was in the bottom 1/4 of all rates across Kansas, and now they wonder why they don't have any money in their water fund. And they got a $60 million plant to pay for. You see what I'm saying? So these are things, the rates, even though it adds to maybe that, if you don't have water, you don't have a city. We found that out in Galvin. You know, I mean, there's just some alarming things that, you know, can happen really quickly. So that's one thing I asked, because it looked like the way the budget preparer had been doing it, it was flatlined, okay? So it looks like the rates have not went up. And this is what really woke me up in Pratt. So let's just think about this. You see it at home, but you really don't transfer it to the city. So in 2020, let's just play with me here, along with me a little bit. 2020 is a 7% inflation. 21 was a 7% inflation. Rough. I'm just using round numbers. 22 was a 7% inflation. What are we at now? 21%? Okay. 23 is another 7% inflation. We're at 28. 24 is another 7% inflation. We're at 35. 35%, okay, this is what was happening in Pratt. 25 to 35% and no increase on the top line. So if you did that at home, which some are doing, you know, I mean, it's pretty hard for groceries and different things now. But the same is for the city. You know, if you have the income coming in and nothing changes, and you're paying the bottom side, and I mean, it just came alive in Pratt. Now, then I started applying that to other cities. I thought, wow, I hadn't really thought about that to that level. But that's why they had to increase by 21%, you know, and probably more. Okay? So that's why I always ask that question. That's something you might look at and see when the last time. And then on page 18 was the ARP funds, and you've already answered that question. Okay, I'm done. Any questions? I can see why Scott was going like this, because I get wound up. Sorry.
On special equipment for the city, we've been around putting into a lease buy, running into a lease buy situation and buying equipment directly.
Oh, instead of doing a lease purchase?
Yeah, lease purchase instead of buying equipment.
Yeah, so that is done a lot of different ways.
Okay.
One of the best ways, if you don't want to do lease purchase, is Marion County. I've done it since '86. And what's really cool about the way we do the budget there is each department, instead of putting it in the special equipment fund, they build a line in their department. And what we do is just like at home, they put a parentheses of what that, like, let's just say, sanitation. That's one of the departments, and she has a vehicle, and she'd been driving it, and literally it was about ready to fall apart. Okay, but what we did, we put a line item that says like Suburban or something. In the brackets, we put $50,000. Okay, and then each year it was very visual and transparent to everybody that every year we're going to take 50,000 divided by 5 or 7, whatever that replacement is, and put it right in and build it right in the budget and let it roll over each year. And then you could do the same thing in the special equipment fund. You could actually build each department in there. One of my counties is that way, where each department has their own money of that 200,000 you got, and each one builds it, and then they just build so much each year by transferring out of their fund into that fund. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but special equipment or equipment reserve and capital improvement are really two very important funds. Another fund that you've not had, not many cities have, it's called the Risk Management Fund. What's happened in these governments is EMC, which is an insurance company, is one of the only ones that will actually insure small cities. And the rates have went up a bunch. And I don't know what yours jumped this last year, but Gallups went up quite a bit. So what I've started doing, and especially the counties, is putting a risk management fund in place and transferring from the general to set back a surplus because we can't borrow for can't remember, I think it was Marion, about 5 years ago, had a 40% increase to their Blue Cross and Blue Shield across all employees. And they didn't have, they had the money, but they didn't have to set aside. So one thing going forward I'm seeing here a lot of is, do we have risk management money set aside for Blue Cross Blue Shield? Do we have EMs like insurance, property insurance and all that? It's kind of hard to get now and the price is going up. But those risks that you identify in your city, you may want to start building for those. That'd be another thing, you can build for, but you can't just go borrow. And the world today is so different than when I started 41 years ago. Okay, it's changed quite a bit. Does that answer your question, Tom? That's okay.
It did. I've been getting a lot of requests for new equipment because a lot of the equipment we have is wore out.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. And we're trying to figure out how the best way we can try to do some upgrades.
Well, I would have told you probably 3 years ago, borrow. Because CAT and John Deere were giving you those leases at less than 1.9, okay? Or even 1.5. Now, you weren't earning a lot off it, but if you have a 5-year lease now, that would have been a pretty good lease because you're doing it at 1.9 and you can earn up to 4 or 5%, so you're actually making extra money here by not using your cash up and just paying it every month.
Right.
But that's not always the case. That's just a hard one. Because like right now, Ottawa County, which is Minneapolis, their last grader was 5% on the lease purchase. And they've got $1.5 million in equipment. They're right north of Salina. And see, that's really, all this is plays into everybody. Okay? Salina has an incredible tax base. Ottawa, which is Minneapolis, doesn't. All they have is houses. Okay? No corporations, no businesses. And their mill levy is almost 90 mills, okay, for that county. And they have 1.5 million in graders of debt. And they're going, how can we do their ARPA money, how can we pay that off? Well, you can't just go pay off 1.5 million when you're already got a 90 mill levy. You see what I'm saying? So it takes a while. Another county, I had 8 sheriff's cars were lease purchased. And the new commissioners didn't want to have that debt. So it took them, every May, I think it was, it took them 5 years to get out of debt. So what they did is that, like they would, every May would come around, they would buy, I think they'd buy 5 or 3, I think. And so every year they would buy 2 on debt, 1 cash. And they worked on that, and it just takes effort. They worked on it, and now they have no debt on their sheriff's cars. So it's kind of your focus, and that's why those 5 things that are very important, just thinking, what are the most important things here in the city to
The
take care
direction
of?
we were thinking was like, the Penske leasing,
What was that now?
like what we were looking at is, I'm going to use the lease company name, Penske Leasing.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The lease is for X number of hours of usage,
Yeah.
and then you turn back in.
Okay.
And you do it again,
Yeah.
so you've got to set monthly payments, and I believe they take care of the maintenance on the equipment.
Yeah.
But is
Yeah, you'd
that,
have to read all the fine print in some of those.
yeah.
Enterprise is really, I don't know if they've come to you yet or not, but Enterprise is really pushing all the cities, Enterprise rental cars.
Okay.
So Lindsberg just went into it, I think last year. I don't do Lindsberg, but he was talking to me about it. They did all their pickups, they just put everything on lease, on a lease, not a lease purchase, on a lease. And Enterprise must have a pretty good rate because they're trying to get in, you know, to most governments. Because I've heard their name all over the state right now. So you just kind of have to look at the fine print too, because you don't want to get in a situation where you have to have it for a certain term, or you have some kind of a balloon payment at the end. I've seen some of those lease purchases where the people go, well, I didn't know we had to pay $50,000 at the end. You know, there's just a lot of things that you have to kind of consider.
So our actual financial health is good. We're not
Yeah,
in shape that we were kind of led to believe we were.
Statement one is the summary statement of your government cash-wise.
Right.
And you don't, I mean, 1.3 million. Now, if you wanted to look at, like, I didn't go this far down and drill into it. We can when we do your budget. But if you look at the sewer and water funds, and I don't know what you've got to, you know, to replace in the next. So like what Galva had to do. Now this is crazy. I don't know if you have any of this or not. I think they got 133,000 in ARPA funds. It's about your same number. But I think it's the one right behind me, Empire Street. I'm not sure. I think that's Empire Street. I've lived there 30. You think I know it? It's running right behind me. But anyway, the connection from the water main to the meter is lead. Okay, down that entire street. So they're going to have to. That 133,000 is going to be used just to correct that lead connection, because you can't have a lead connection in your water system. I think that's right. Huh? We have the same problem. Yeah. Oh my. Okay. Anything else?
I got another question. Since
Sure.
we deal with a lot of other cities, municipalities, what all grant writers are out there besides, I mean, we use Rosemary and Saunders.
Yeah, Rosemary. She's very good.
Yeah. Is there any others that are available that you can think of?
No, like Carlotta, I was telling you about with the ARPA funds. She watches this stuff a little bit, but it's just hard to find any money. You know, COVID, you had money flying out the zoo, and but now there's just not a lot. Now I meet with Tom Brown, who's the mayor of McPherson. He's a good friend of mine for 30 years. We met on Saturday morning, and he was the one that just told me about the EPA, where we got it in Galva. We got it from the state of Kansas, the money for the water. But EPA now has come out with a similar program, and you could reapply. So that would be a situation where you kind of hear by, you know, where he was at some conference, and you know, he heard that. And so I don't know. I'm going to check into it. I haven't had time to check into it yet, but we'll be looking at it. I will tell you another quick story, okay? Not very long here. So you've got 1,344,000, and you've got 456,000 in your general fund. This is public information, so I'm not divulging anything here. But Pretty Prairie called me about 10 years ago and said, Scott, would you come audit our city? We need some help. They had $198 in their general fund, okay? $198. You heard me right. Yeah. And what had happened is a person in town had gifted the golf course to the city, and they thought they could run it, okay? And they tried to run it for like 4 or 5 years with golf cart leases, with the payroll, all that. They ended up spending like $500,000 on the golf course, went in the hole, and then they have no money. So I always tell people, a gift is not always the best thing that can happen, okay? And, but I see that, literally, I'm not saying you don't need more money because of the things you gotta do, but it's not like I mean, you've got a lot more money than some of the little cities I work with. Yeah.
The frustrating thing for us is, we read the news, and we see this city got 2.3 mil, just got 800,000, and there's always grants coming through. We're not getting it. We're trying to figure out how we get into that stuff. Is it a matter of wording it, finding the right people,
Well,
finding sources?
you've got one of the best grant writers or persons that keeps up with that. from Ransom Financial, that's where she works for. And she lived, everywhere I go, if there's a grant, she's usually got her name attached to it, okay? And I've worked with her for 30 years probably. It's hard to find somebody that, it's like Mayor Brown, okay? Mayor Brown's been the mayor now, I think when he ends his term, it'll be about 16 years, okay? Well, he is very involved in a lot of things across the state of Kansas, and so he goes to training, all this training and this stuff all the time. He finds out these things that nobody else, and see, he knows specifically what the city of McPherson needs, and if you can't really get a grant writer to go do that because they don't know exactly what the city of McPherson needs, or they don't know what the city of Canton needs. So it's really, that's the hard part I've found over the 41 years is finding a grant writer. Rosemary's the closest thing to that, that knows, has been around a while, and knows where the money comes from. Whether it's Department of Commerce, whether it's the water, you know, or sewer, you know, the revolving loan funds of the state of Kansas. Yeah. Or
So it comes back to, we have to identify the need and then go after her.
That's right, yeah, yeah. And that's why I did it this way tonight, is get you thinking of capital planning, because I know some of your needs, just from, you know, from me knowing it and doing your stuff for this long, but also just people asking questions, you know? And, you know, just come up with your needs, and then like those 4 steps I told you, finding the funding source, that's number 1. You know, you identify your product or your project, find the funding source, and then see if it makes sense, a business sense. Sometimes just because you have the project and a funding source, it may not make business sense. Like the golf course in Prairie. You know, they used up all their money. And so, yeah, anyway. Anything else? I'm not trying to rush you, I don't want to talk for an hour and a half now.
Anybody in the public have any questions?
Do you have a card with you?
Absolutely.
I'd like to have one,
You want one?
yeah.
I don't do taxes though, okay?
I don't want to, no, I gotta figure.
No, I'm serious. I've got called 50 times since
don't
I put
need-
my sign
I
on
don't-
Galva Main Street that they want
No,
me to do
I
the
don't
taxes.
need tax,
No,
I need
don't
to,
do taxes.
I need to do something else.
Oh, do something.
But you do, but you can learn online, like you said, right?
Yeah.
And you probably have things that would apply to the needs that I have. That's why I'd at least
You
try.
can call and ask me, or catch me out in my yard. That's where I usually get stopped in my yard. Somebody asks me a question.
Okay, all right,
Okay?
yeah. Is that webpage on here? Yeah,
It
okay,
is, absolutely, yeah.
all right,
That's my cell number. You can get me right there anytime.
okay. May work for me, anyway.
Yeah, I have a question on the budget side.
Yep.
Like the special equipment funding that we get every year, allotted so much. What happens to that? Does it roll back to the general funding
No,
if
it's-
not used, or?
Now, the statute says you could transfer it back to general, but once you transfer to special equipment, it stays there unless someone transfers it back.
So say we had $60,000 budgeted the previous 2 years.
Yeah,
So $120,000, and we spent $15,000.
Mhm.
The rest of that money is still there and
Yep.
should be available for equipment purchases, correct?
yep. So, if you look at the 94 budget, here, you don't, oh, you could look at one if you want. I have a couple extra. But what it